Hi guys, I'm the Drink Pro. Today we're sampling Jefferson's Grand Selection. Hey everybody, preemptive warning, I didn't plug in the microphone for this review. It's gonna be a little weird. It should still all sound right. It just might not be as clear and as crisp as I want it to be. Sorry about that. Sometimes you fuck up. Hey guys, Drink Pro here. Thanks again for joining me. Today I'm tasting the Jefferson Grand Selection. Big shout out to Brent Fowler for providing me with this sample. Jefferson Grand Selection is a relatively expensive whiskey. I've seen this online about $150, $140 a bottle. I've seen some variants in that price, but that's what I looked up today. It's an interesting pour from the Jefferson line. So Thomas Jefferson was actually America's first wine ambassador. Believe it or not, that's a real thing. And he really enjoyed the Sauternes wines. I think I'm saying that right. Sauternes wines actually come from Bordeaux in France. And it's interesting because this wine actually is made based on a fungus that grows on the grapes, and it kind of turns the sugars in the grapes a little bit and creates a really interesting sweet wine. It's sometimes known as the noble rot, which you may have heard that term before. This particular whiskey was actually finished in a Sauternes wine barrel from Chateau Suduiraut. I hope I'm saying that right, I'm probably not, but I'll put the name in the description so you can see what I'm talking about. The Grand Cru Chateau Suduiraut Sauternes wine will affect the flavor in here, and I'm really interested to see what will change because of the noble rot that occurred on the grapes and how that might affect the barrels. The barrels that were used in the wine are French oak, and they've been toasted, so it's not going to have the same kind of char as maybe a traditional bourbon. But this is all in the finish realm anyway, so this whiskey is going to have a lot of different things affecting it. It's going to be affected by the fresh American oak that began the life of the whiskey, and then the finishing process, we're going to have this French oak that was toasted and the Sauternes wine that remained in the barrels before the whiskey was put into a hothouse, and then all of those flavors kind of coalesce in the barrel. So it should be a really exciting pour to try. So without further ado, let's go ahead and try this whiskey. When I first started doing this, the pours coming out of these little sample jars were pretty tenuous. Depth perception isn't my best feature, but you know, we made it work. Now this whiskey is sitting at 45%, so it's not as high proof as a lot of the stuff I taste. Ooh, but you can smell the wine on the nose. Now I will say, if you've ever had sherry finished whiskeys, particularly American whiskeys with a sherry finish, you're really going to notice the wine qualities. But this one's a little bit more subtle. The whiskey still kind of shines through. Maybe the history of this glass influences my palate, but some of that sourness is really coming through. I'm certainly smelling that kind of sourness you would expect from a sour grape. You typically would get more of a wine note on a bourbon that's been finished in something like a sherry barrel or a port barrel. This one's very subtle. There's definitely some baking spice in there. I guess I would call it a nutmeg, which is not something I pull a lot in whiskey tastings, but it's definitely something I'm sensitive to. I really like a nutmeg smell, so when I see it in a whiskey, I really like it. It's definitely very sweet on the nose, which isn't surprising. You have a relatively sweet wine combined with a whiskey that's being made in bourbon fashion, so it's going to get that corn sweetness, it's going to get that new oak sweetness. I would guess I would call it like a honey sweetness, but the fruity note from the grape is definitely present. So there's maybe a dark fruit characteristic, which I don't like the note dark fruit, by the way. I think it's a lazy note, but sometimes you just can't quite parse out which dark fruit you're talking about. I wouldn't call this a cherry, which is a very typical bourbon note, but I also wouldn't call this like a blackberry or a raisin or anything like that. There's sort of a jumble of dark fruits in there, and none of them really stands out. The more I sit with this whiskey, the more I'm getting some grain characteristics that are subtle but are starting to come to life. The sweetness kind of evolved from a honey into more of a corn sweetness. I'll be really straight with you guys. I'm not particularly good with finished whiskeys. I have a hard time because I'm not a wine connoisseur. So when I'm tasting wine, I pull out the barrel notes and the grape notes and the fruit notes out of the wine. But seeing how the wine barrels affect the whiskey is not something I typically am good at. But it's a fun experiment to try to push yourself and see what is outside of your comfort zone that you might like. I typically don't like a sherried whiskey, but a good friend, Josh, showed me some sherried whiskeys that I really did enjoy. So always be exploring and pushing your palate and seeing if you can come out with new things, guys. It's a great way to, find new things you enjoy that you wouldn't have tried otherwise. You have to explore your palate. The baking spices become more prominent. I'm starting to get more clear fruit notes. Maybe a cherry, I think, is really the note I'm pulling. I'm also getting like an apple note. Maybe even a molasses characteristic. It's very complex in the nose. It keeps changing on me. Arguably even a slight leather, a slight tannic quality, but you don't get a lot of barrel spice on this. Finishing a whiskey tends to mute a lot of that barrel, and some people like that and some people don't, so it can be divisive. All right, let's give this a taste. Whoa. So I haven't had any tastes prior to this, and different tastes can affect your palate, but boy, there's something funky going on in there. The Noble Rot, I'm glad I read that, because otherwise I would legitimately think there was something wrong with this whiskey. There's a legitimate sourness in the palate. Let me give it another taste to give it a real shot here. Oh boy, though, oh no, when you go back on the nose, oh my. The sourness is becoming stronger and stronger. It's almost like a sour beer. If you like sours in the beer world, you might be a real fan of this, because I'm getting a lot of those same notes. Like something spoiled. And it did! Very soft vanilla right off the bat on the palate. Gentle wood notes in the background, gentle malt sweetness in the background. There's actually a little fruitiness from the mid-palate to the finish, but the pervasive note over all of this is not the sweetness of the wine, it's the sourness of the wine, which is a really weird characteristic. Typically with a peated whiskey, you'll sort of have peat throughout the flavor profile. With a good sherried whiskey, you'll see sherry throughout the flavor profile. I'm getting the sour note of that Noble Rot on this, and it's not for me. I'm going to give it one more taste to give it a shot. I want to really give this thing a chance at succeeding. Oh, guys, this is a $150 whiskey. It better be damn good for me to recommend it. And I'm having trouble with this. If you like sour flavors, this might be a good whiskey for you, particularly if you like sour beers, or if you like this particular type of wine that has this Noble Rot in it from Bordeaux. Otherwise, I'm hard-pressed to recommend this. It's an adventure, but I can't see buying a bottle of this. Paying for a taste at a bar, maybe, depending on the price point, but it's just very difficult for someone who is used to a bourbon world, which is much sweeter, and even honestly someone who's used to a Scotch world where your flavors are going to be complex and nuanced, but you're not going to see a lot of sourness. Sourness is usually something people pull away from. You might get an extreme smoke, you may even get a chemical iodine flavor or a sharp metallic flavor, but none of those are sour. And so this is really a unique pour, and I applaud them for that. The uniqueness on this is undoubtable, but is it a uniqueness I would seek out? No. It's 45%. I'm not going to add any water to it today. Sometimes I add water, particularly with the higher proof ones, but I just can't drink any more of this, to be honest with you. It's just not for me. Nothing against Brent. I think Brent might have known that this was going to happen, because he gave me a little warning when we did the exchange of the sample. He was kind of like, I don't know if you'll like this, but I want you to try it. So I really appreciate that. If you can see, I've got a lot of samples lined up. I'm hoping to do some tastings with those. Some of those have already done tastings, the videos haven't been released yet, so keep an eye out. Sample Sundays are still going to be in full effect. And thanks you all for supporting me. If you can't send me a sample, I'd love it if you could join the Patreon account. Be a member of the Society of Drinking Professionals. Cheers.